Alright, what's going on everyone? Today I'm going to help you decide which Throne of Eldraine Brawl deck you should be purchasing. The purpose of this video is to give a brief overview of all 4 decks so you can have a better idea about which one best suits your playstyle. Also, you can find a link to the official deck list page in the description below. Anyway, let's start with Wild Bounty. This is a Bant deck with a very heavy emphasis on ramping into big creatures that have powerful effects when they enter the battlefield. The commander for this deck is Tulane, Teller of Tales, who is a 5-mana 2/4 with Vigilance that says whenever you cast a creature spell, you get to draw a card and then put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. Which means that every time you play a creature, you have a chance to draw into another creature. And then that creature can give you a chance to draw into another creature. And so on and so forth. Basically, you get to play more and more creatures, and also if you draw into lands, then you can play more and more lands to play even bigger creatures, and so on and so forth. You can also pay 3 and tap it to return a creature to your hand, allowing you to recast it and re-trigger its enter the battlefield effect, as well as trigger Tulane again to draw even more cards. So looking at some of the creatures in the deck, it plays things like Solana Wayfinder and District Guide. The guide lets you search for a land and put it into your hand, which allows you to color fix as well as fill your hand with extra lands that you can play with Tulane, and the Wayfinder can search for a land or a creature and put it on top. The important thing about these is they allow you to go huge on mana while drawing new cards with Tulane. It also plays things like Meteor Golem and Thorn Mammoth. Both of these have triggers that we can take advantage of with Tulane. The Golem can come into play and blow up a permanent while drawing you a card with your commander, and then it can be returned to do it all over again. The Mammoth doesn't do anything when it enters the battlefield, but it does allow you to fight a creature every time you play another creature, giving you another way to blow up your opponent's permanents. Another cool thing you can do with this deck is put a soft lock on your opponent with Frilled Mystic. It can counter a spell when you play it, and with Tulane, not only can you continuously return it to your hand over and over again so you can keep countering spells, but you also get to draw a card every time you cast it, which is pretty devastating. It also has things like Steelbane Hydra, which enters the battlefield with X+1/+1 counters, and the really cool part about it is you can remove those to blow up your opponent's artifacts and enchantments, and then you can bounce it to your hand and recast it to refill it on those +1/+1 counters, which is pretty cool. And then it also plays, plenty of other creatures, things like Risen Reef, Shark to Crab, Enray's Forerunners. The Risen Reef is another card advantage engine. Shark to Crab can keep a creature locked down or just beat down with a 5/5, and Enray's Forerunners is an absolute game finisher, pumping all your creatures by 2. It's just absolutely devastating, and if your opponent somehow manages to survive the attack, well then you can always bounce it and have another go at it. So yeah, pretty good. Oh, and as an added bonus, it also plays Biomancer's Familiar with things like Spectral Sailor and Fairy Formation. The Familiar reduces the cost of activated abilities, allowing you to activate the Sailor and the Fairy Formation for very cheap. And remember, this deck produces a ton of mana, so this is actually kind of crazy if you manage to get these into play at the same time. Anyway, if you like ramping into beefy creatures while drawing a ton of cards and generating a bunch of value with all kinds of enter the battlefield effects, then Wild Bounty might be the deck for you. After that, we have Knight's Charge, which if you can't guess by the title is shockingly a tribal knights deck. Mardu Knights to be precise. The commander in this one is Sir Gwyn, Hero of Ashvale, which is a 6-mana 5/5 with Vigilance and Menace that says if we attack with a creature that is equipped, we get to draw a card at the cost of a life, and also we can equip any piece of equipment to a knight for 0 mana. So this one is pretty self-explanatory. We really want to suit up some knights with some weapons and armor and go attacking with them. So yeah, this deck has knights. All kinds of knights, from spooky knights like Knight of the Ebon Legion, Corpse Knight, and Midnight Rider, to more wholesome knights like Venerable Knight, Inspiring Veteran, and Smitten Swordmaster. Is the Swordmaster wholesome? I don't know. He's not as spooky as the Midnight Reaper, so I guess he can stay on the screen, but you can see the tribal theme with things like Inspiring Veteran and Bell of the Brawl. The Veteran is a lord that gives all your knights +1/+1, and the Bell of the Brawl gives gives all other knights +1/+0 when she's attacking. So yeah, it's all about playing knights, making them bigger. You also get things like Wintermoor Commander and Knight's Charge. The commander has toughness equal to the number of knights you control, and also makes one of your other knights indestructible when it attacks. And Knight's Charge allows us to drain the opponent for 1 for every knight that attacks, and also allows us to sacrifice it to reanimate all of our fallen knights. Equipment also plays a major role in this deck, and it comes with things like Steel Claw Lance, Colossus Hammer, and Mace of the Valiant. The Lance isn't crazy, but it does equip for very cheap in the early game. Colossus Hammer is insane, giving a creature +10/+10, and you can negate that hefty equip cost with your commander since she allows you to equip to knights for 0. And the Mace generates charge counters whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, and then makes the equipped creature get massive based on the number of counters it has. And remember also that the Mace doesn't have to be equipped to get that counter. It'll get that counter even if it's just sitting on the battlefield. So yeah, anyway, if you like the sound of going wide with knights and gearing up a few champions with hefty pieces of metal to stab your opponent with, then Knight's Charge might be the deck you're looking for. Next up is Savage Hunger, which is a Jund Aristocrats deck. If you don't know what an Aristocrat deck is, basically it's a deck that really likes to sacrifice its own permanents to punish the opponent. Trust me, it makes sense. We'll look at it. Just give me a second here. So the commander for this one is Corvold, Fae-Cursed King. He's a 5-mana 4/4 flyer, and when it enters the battlefield or attacks, we have to sacrifice another permanent, which sounds bad, but whenever we sacrifice a permanent, Corvold gets a +1/+1 counter, and we draw a card to replace the thing that we sacrificed. So that's handy. First off, it plays way more payoffs for sacrificing permanents, things like Mayhem Devil, Judith the Scourge Diva, and Vindictive Vampire. With these, when you sacrifice stuff to Corvold, we also get to dish out a ton of damage. The Devil and the Diva deal 1 damage to any target, and the Vampire drains the opponent for 1, so we get even more value. But there's more, because the deck also gives us some really cool sack outlets with Priestess of the Forgotten Gods and Witch's Oven. The Priestess allows us to sacrifice 2 creatures, which sounds like a hefty price, but then it forces every opponent to also sacrifice a creature as well as lose 2 life. And then we get 2 mana and we get to draw a card. And with Corvold, we'd get to draw 2 cards, meaning we'd lose 2 creatures but get 2 cards. Then our opponent would lose a creature and lose 2 life, and we'd also get the +1/+1 counter, the mana, and also trigger the creatures from the previous screen. And so you kind of see how we can actually gain value by sacrificing our own things. The Oven, on the other hand, allows us to sacrifice a creature for a food token, but if it's a big creature, we get multiple food tokens. And the great thing about this is we not only get to draw from Corvold when we sacrifice the creature, but the food tokens can also be sacrificed to Corvold when he attacks to get more counters and more cards, or we can just sacrifice them for more life, which still gets us the counter and the card if Corvold is in play. So we can actually generate a lot of card draw just from sacrificing our creatures to the Witch's Oven. Oh, and then there's also Moldervine Reclamation, which is another way to draw even more cards when we sacrifice creatures. So yeah, you can see what's going on here, right? You're supposed to be losing stuff when you sacrifice creatures, but we're actually gaining card advantage by blowing up our own stuff. The deck also comes with stuff like Goblin Cratermaker and Thrashing Brontodon, which are cards that are just, generally kind of good and have built-in sacrifice abilities to trigger all of our stuff. And there are even token producers like Krinko and Savvy Hunter, so we can get more triggers and generate more card advantage by sacrificing tokens that we can generate for free or for very little cost. So yeah, that is an Aristocrats deck. If you like to blow up your own board in order to blow up your opponent's board even harder, I think Savage Hunter might be the deck for you. You also might be a sociopath, but hey, that's fine with me. Victory at any cost, right? And the final deck of the batch is Faerie Schemes, an Esper deck, which is a deck that cares a lot about artifacts and enchantments, and also going wide with fairy tokens. It's kind of weird. Let's just take a look at it. The commander in this one is Alila, Artful Provocator. She's a 4-mana 2/3 with Flying, Death Touch, and Lifelink, and she also gives other flyers you control +1/+0. and whenever you cast an artifact or enchantment, you get to put a 1/1 flying fairy token into play, which will then be pumped by Alila herself. So the deck plays a ton of artifacts to generate those tokens. Lots and lots of artifacts. We're not going to go over what they all do, but mostly they're just artifacts that we can play to generate fairy tokens, which will then be pumped by a whole bunch of cards in this deck. And the common thread with all these artifacts is most of them allow us to draw a card. So the idea is that we play an artifact, that artifact will let us draw, hopefully get another artifact which we can play, and draw and play and draw and play while generating tokens. That's the general idea, play a bunch of artifacts while generating tokens with Alila. Now, enchantments are also important because they also generate tokens. However, in this department, the deck has a lot of enchantments that are good at controlling the board, like Conclave Tribunal, Prison Realm, and Law Mage's Binding, for example. There are plenty more enchantments in the deck, but the core theme is to play things like this that exile or imprison a creature, so not only are you sort of playing a control deck with all of these white removal spells, but you're also generating fairy tokens while you're doing it. And the deck also has more payoffs for having those fairies, such as Empyrean Eagle and Saphara Sky's Blade. The Eagle can pump them up even further, and the Angel is a very expensive 7/7 flyer with lifelink, but you can cast her for just one single mana if you have 4 fairy tokens to tap. So not only is she a massive game-ending threat, but she also makes the rest of your flyers indestructible. The deck also has some payoffs built into the artifacts and enchantments with things like Heraldic Banner and All That Glitters. Cards like this will both generate tokens with Alila and then make those tokens more powerful. The banner gives all creatures of a chosen color +1/+0, and All That Glitters can enchant a fairy token and then make it absolutely massive by giving it +1/+1 for each artifact and enchantment we control. So once again, I think you see what the deck is doing. It's playing lots of artifacts and enchantments, which in turn allows the deck to go super wide with fairy tokens. A few other notable cards in the deck that I think exemplify what the deck is doing is things like Shine Chaser, Arcanist Owl, and Shimmer Dragon. The Shine Chaser gets pumped up by artifacts and enchantments. The Owl lets you dig 4 cards deep for an artifact or an enchantment, and also notably counts as an artifact itself, so don't miss that. And then the Dragon is a massive threat that will usually have hexproof and also can start tapping your artifacts to draw cards. That's actually pretty good because a lot of times you'll have several artifacts out, so being able to draw 2 or 3 cards per turn by tapping artifacts that don't care whether they're tapped or not is not that bad. Remember that just because an artifact doesn't have a tap ability doesn't mean that you can't tap it with the dragon. So like Witching Well, for example, doesn't have a tap ability, doesn't matter, you can still tap it for the dragon to draw cards. So it's actually pretty good. And also it's just a 5/6 flyer that's going to be difficult to target, which is pretty good as well. And one final notable card I think is Workshop Elders. Every turn you get to animate one of your artifacts into basically a 4/4 creature. That is to say it's a 0/0 with 4 +1/+1 counters, and it also gives all artifact creatures flying so they can soak up those buffs from things like Alila and Empyrean Eagle. So that's definitely the type of card that can win the game in the late game. So anyway, if you like flooding the board with lots of artifacts and enchantments, and then using those to generate a bunch of pesky flying fairy tokens, then Faerie Schemes might be the deck that you're looking for. And that is all of the decks. Wild Bounty, Knight's Charge, Savage Hunger, and Faerie Schemes. I hope this has given you a decent idea about how these decks work, and like I mentioned earlier, if you want to see the full deck list, you can find a link to those in the description below. I'll also link all the decks on Amazon if you want to check them out, but I would highly encourage you to check your local game store if you're interested in these, and depending on your store, you might be able to find them for much cheaper. I'm not going to go too deep into it in this video, but the prices of these are fluctuating like crazy, and it's just hard to say where you'll get the best deal for these. I recommend shopping around, but I will leave at least Amazon links in the description below if you want to check those out, but definitely support your local game store. Anyway, that's it for me. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope this video was helpful, and I will see you in the next one.